my name is John Heckel, and I'm the Payload Operations Engineer for STS-83, the Microgravity Science Laboratory. We're standing inside the Orbiter Processing Facility, and what you see over my shoulder is the Microgravity Science Laboratory inside the orbiter's payload bay. The Microgravity Science Laboratory weighs about 10 tons. It's 23 feet long and about 13 feet in diameter. It only takes up about a third of the orbiter's payload bay. And the way the astronauts get from the crew module into the Spacelab module is they travel through this long tunnel you see here.
What I'd like to do first is introduce the crew to you.
Commander James Halsell will lead a crew that includes 2 women, Susan Still, the rookie pilot, and Janice Voss, the payload commander. Over 16 days, the 7 astronauts will conduct round-the-clock experiments aboard Spacelab, a laboratory inside the cargo bay designed for a special mission.
To focus on advancing American exploration of a new frontier, the frontier of the use of weightlessness or microgravity, to learn more about our physical world.
The microgravity experiments will include studies on plants and crystallized proteins, which could lead to the production of life-saving medicines. The astronauts will also study fire by setting dozens of them. On Earth, this flame burns upward, but in space, it would burn spherically in all directions.
By doing combustion experiments in microgravity, we can learn things about the basics of the combustion phenomenon that can help us produce more efficient airplane engines, car engines, power plants.
What's more, the astronauts will use a superheated furnace to study transforming metals, a process that could be important to manufacturing. All the while, multiple images of these experiments will be sent back to Earth by a high-pack digital television system. The ambitious schedule will require pacing.
This flight, with 24-hour-a-day science operations occurring over a 16-day period, will be more like a 10-kilometer race to get warmed up for the space station marathons that are coming right around the corner.
In fact, this mission demonstrates why a space station would be invaluable. Some estimate that 1 year on a space station would yield as much science as has been done during the entire history of the space program. At the Kennedy Space Center, Keith Oppenheim, CNN.
The primary oxygen generators have failed aboard the Russian space station Mir, forcing the 3-man crew to use a backup system. And as CNN's Dan Ronan reports, if that system goes down, the only option is probably to bail out of the space station.
The Mir has several redundant systems to generate oxygen for the crew. One generator makes breathing oxygen from wastewater. Friday, it failed. Russian officials tried to activate an older identical backup system. It malfunctioned and was shut down. Russian officials then told the crew to use chemicals that were heated to make oxygen. Officials say there's about a 2-month supply of chemicals on board. Still, that device is usually used as a supplemental system when there are more than 3 crew members in the space station. Right now, there are 3 people on board.
What we probably have is, in essence, a plumbing problem, that air is getting into the water lines and causing the electron unit to shut down, or possibly particulate matter in the water is building up in the system in some sort of a contamination or clogging process and causing the unit to shut down.
This latest problem on the Mir space station just comes 2 weeks after a fire in another one of the chemical oxygen systems. U.S. astronaut Jerry Leninger and his 2 Russian cosmonaut colleagues put the fire out with emergency gear. NASA and Russian officials say the recent problems with the Russian space station are coincidental and unrelated.
We obviously take these kind of issues very seriously, and we're going to, do whatever is prudent to make sure that we keep both our astronaut as well as the cosmonaut safe. But I think this is mostly just the challenge of spaceflight.
As you can see from these pictures on the internet, the Mir space station is an erector set-looking device. Russian officials say, should the current chemical oxygen system fail, there are tanks with a 5-day supply of emergency oxygen. But after that, the crew would be forced to evacuate the space station and return to Earth aboard the attached Soyuz return capsule and make an emergency landing. Dan Ronan, CNN reporting.
Russia this week launched the first satellite from its new space launch site in Siberia. It's a military communications satellite. The new site will be used mainly for commercial launches. Manned missions will still take off from the Baikonur site in Kazakhstan, which is now a separate country since the breakup of the Soviet Union. A veteran spacecraft celebrates an anniversary this month as NASA bids it a fond farewell. Pioneer 10 was launched 25 years ago and still sends a clear signal back to Earth from 6 billion miles away. That's the farthest a human-made object has ever gone. But the old spacecraft has lost most of its power, and now it's losing its funding. As of March 31st, the program has no budget. A few scientists will listen for its signals once in a while, but basically, NASA is saying goodbye as it floats farther and farther away. In case intelligent beings ever find it, Pioneer carries a plaque with greetings from Earth. The spacecraft was designed for a 21-month mission. The first reports are in on the refurbished Hubble Space Telescope. The telescope was upgraded during a shuttle mission last month. NASA says everything looks good with one exception. The problem is 2 new instruments are much more sensitive than expected to radiation, coming from a high radiation zone that the telescope passes through as often as 9 times a day. NASA officials say they're confident they can fix the problem and it won't affect the Hubble's scientific mission.
Die Sonne, wie wir sie kennen. Zentralkörper unseres Planetensystems und von allen Sternen der Erde am nächsten. Hier die Sonne, wie wir sie nicht kennen. Ein brennender Ball, der von seiner Oberfläche solare Winde aus Milliarden Tonnen Gasen ins All ausspuckt. Eruptionen wie diese können Millionen Kilometer weiter auf der Erde sogar technische Kommunikationsleitungen außer Gefecht setzen. Außerdem zu sehen auf den Bildern des Satelliten SOHO Kometeneinschläge auf der Sonne. Der wiederum scheint das kaum etwas auszumachen. Große Pläne auch bei der US-Raumfahrtbehörde NASA. Mehr als 20 Jahre nach dem letzten Besuch von Menschen auf dem Mond wollen die Wissenschaftler wieder mehr über den Planeten erfahren. Im September wird die Raumsonde Lunar Prospector ins All geschickt. In nur 100 Kilometern Entfernung wird sie den Mond umkreisen und Aufnahmen machen. So wollen die Forscher unter anderem erfahren, ob es auf dem Mond möglicherweise Wasser und damit Hinweise auf Leben gibt. Denn trotz allen Fortschritts, fast 3/4 der Mondoberfläche sind in den Karten noch nicht erfasst.
3 Monate dauerte die Reise. Dann gelangt der Satellit SOHO an einen ganz besonderen Punkt. Wissenschaftler nennen ihn L1. Er ist der beste Punkt, um die Sonne zu beobachten, da der Satellit nie Gefahr läuft, in den Erdschatten zu kommen. Von hier aus gelingen SOHO solche faszinierenden Aufnahmen. Riesige Mengen von Gas eruptieren aus der Sonne. Ein Komet kommt dem Fixstern zu nahe und verglüht im Inneren. Hier sondert die Sonne Billionen von geladenen und neutralen Teilchen ab. In einer Sekunde setzt sie so viel Energie frei, wie die gesamte Menschheit bisher noch nicht verbraucht hat. SOHO soll die Sonne weiterhin beobachten und in immer neuen Licht erscheinen lassen.
NASA is downplaying reports of trouble on the Russian space station Mir. The agency says the crew, 2 Russians and an American, are not in danger in spite of problems with Mir's oxygen supply. 2 oxygen-generating systems on the station have been knocked out in the past month. But NASA says there's still enough oxygen on board to last until supplies arrive next month. And there's always a Soyuz spacecraft docked at the station to use for an emergency escape back to Earth. NASA is trying to make every project smaller, cheaper, and better. And that includes a new spacecraft whose mission is to tell us what we don't know about our own moon. Don Knapp reports.
As you see, Lunar Prospector is a very small spacecraft.
NASA gave this tiny spaceship a huge assignment. Go to the moon, find out if there's any water there. And while you're up, look for uranium, titanium, aluminum, check for volcanoes, and, oh, by the way, do it on the cheap. And so the Lunar Prospector will head for the moon in September, jam-packed with some off-the-shelf technology. It's sort of a space-age pickup truck, loaded with just enough fuel to get it into orbit about 65 miles above the surface, along with a half-dozen instruments.
This particular instrument looks at neutrons, which come from the moon, and by the ratio of very fast neutrons to very slow neutrons, we can determine if there's water.
Alan Binder began work on the project 8 years ago, long before recent research suggested comets brought water to the moon. If the little spaceship finds lunar water, the discovery might accelerate manned exploration of the solar system.
So you just have to have it if you're going to have a permanent presence on the moon. The second point is that water in the form of hydrogen and oxygen, when you break it down into its basic components, is the best possible fuel for rockets.
If there is water, the moon could become a space base, and a refueling station for expeditions around the solar system. NASA's counting on the Lunar Prospector not only to bring back new information about the moon, but to prove that NASA can do it faster, better, and cheaper than before. In other words, to justify money spent on space exploration. The project's $63 million budget buys the space probe, the rocket launch, and a year of operation. Relatively cheap when compared to the $260 million cost of NASA's first lunar orbiter more than 3 decades ago.
Researchers at the Kennedy Space Center are trying to solve a problem much like the one that confronted the ancient mariners. Water, water everywhere, but ne'er a drop to drink. Before humans can venture far from Earth to live and work on the Moon or Mars, scientists will have to develop a way to optimize the use of the water astronauts will need for survival.
The idea, of course, is that if you create a lunar base or a Mars colony or a transit vehicle, then resupply is much too costly. And we must then be able to recycle this material through the system without major resupply.
The water coming out of this tube at the Kennedy Research Facility is called gray water. During a 3-month study, volunteers come in once a week for morning showers. Others bring in their dirty laundry.
No one's doing yard work or anything where you have a bunch of grass stains or that kind of thing, so this is just t-shirts and socks and towels.
The used water, filled with body salts, microorganisms, and soap, is then collected. The soap is the same one used by Space Shuttle astronauts.
This is a soap that's currently being used because it contains no extra ingredients like typical soap you buy off the shelf.
Once the gray water is collected, it is taken to a greenhouse where the research team uses it to grow wheat and potatoes.
Controlled environment gets rid of most all the stresses that we know of so that the plants should grow at their optimal level, and we hope the same will happen in space.
Researchers say from shower and laundry water, plants can produce food that's safe to eat, and through photosynthesis, produce air to breathe. Scientists hope to prove tomorrow's mariners can have an easier time of it than did the mariners of the past. John Zarella, CNN, Miami.
Bereits 1983 verließ Pioneer 10 unser Sonnensystem. Inzwischen ist die Sonde mehr als 9,6 Milliarden Kilometer weit von der Erde entfernt. Noch nie ist etwas von Menschenhand Geschaffenes so weit ins All vorgedrungen. Dass Pioneer 10 überhaupt noch Signale gesendet hat, grenzt an ein Wunder. Als die Sonde im März 1972 ins All geschossen wurde, hoffte die NASA, dass sie 21 Monate durchhält. Gerade lang genug, um den Planeten Jupiter zu erforschen. Zu ihrer Freude reiste Pioneer weiter durch das Sonnensystem und funkte auch weiter Daten, bis sie unser Planetensystem verließ. Danach konnten ihre Instrumente keine sinnvollen Informationen mehr liefern. Auch wenn die Geräte auf der Erde abgeschaltet sind, hat Pioneer immer noch einen Sinn. Auf einer goldenen Platte sind außen Grüße der Menschheit angebracht und eine Lagekarte der Erde im Sonnensystem. Die größte Grußpostkarte der Welt wird vermutlich frühestens in 30.000 Jahren gelesen, denn erst dann erreicht Pioneer die nächstgelegenen Planeten.
It was 1988 when the Air Force lifted the veil of secrecy over the B-2 stealth bomber. Now, 9 years and $44 billion later, the world's priciest warplane has finally been deemed ready for combat.
Today at Whiteman Air Force Base, we have crews that are trained. We have the munitions in place that give the aircraft both a conventional and a nuclear capability.
The Batwing B-2 was conceived in the 80s as a deep-penetrating nuclear bomber, a mission that disappeared with the end of the Cold War.
It was clearly designed to go after, drop nuclear bombs in Russia against selected targets. That threat is gone now. The Air Force doesn't want to buy anymore. The United States has ponied up the money. They're going to get 21 of these bombers.
So, in an effort to salvage its multi-billion-dollar investment, the Pentagon has refitted the B-2 to drop conventional bombs, and now touts the B-2's ability to take out as many as 16 targets in a single sortie.
In the past, we talked about how many aircraft we needed to destroy a target. With the B-2, we talk about how many targets we can destroy with one aircraft.
The B-2 is well suited to carry the Pentagon's bunker-busting B-61 nuclear bomb, which could be used if the U.S. ever had to take out deeply buried facilities that can be found in North Korea or Libya. But despite the B-2's unique capabilities, a Pentagon review found that smaller attack planes equipped with smarter bombs and missiles would give the military more bang for its buck.
I think if we had it to do over again, we would approach the B-2 differently.
The Air Force's top general says the B-2 is a great plane, but too expensive to continue buying at $2.2 billion a copy.
Even at the cost it is today, I think that you have a force that has such a significant increase in capability that it's worth the cost that we put into it.
While some in Congress still favor buying more of the radar-evading B-2s, the Air Force insists the 21 now in the works are more than enough. Jamie McIntyre, CNN, The Pentagon.
Stündiger Verspätung soll die US-Raumfähre Columbia heute von Cape Canaveral ins All abheben. Die NASA hatte den Start der 7 Astronauten aus Sicherheitsgründen verschoben. Es fehlte ein Stück der Isolierung für das Kühlsystem. Während des 16-tägigen Weltraumfluges will die Mannschaft auch ein deutsches Experiment zur Metallherstellung in der Schwerelosigkeit durchführen. Es ist die letzte Reise mit dem Weltraumlabor Spacelab.
The U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia is scheduled to lift off in about 8 hours on a mission expected to last 16 days and perhaps to yield information that could be used years in the future. The spacecraft is loaded with 33 experiments designed with an eye for the proposed International Space Station. One experiment to see how flames act in weightlessness recently gained extra urgency. The crew on the Russian space station Mir had to put out a smoky fire in February. And problems at the Russian Space Agency are said to be delaying the startup of that International Space Station. Officials at NASA and other space agencies tell CNN that financial troubles at the Russian agency are delaying work on some crucial systems for the station. The first portions of the station were supposed to be lifted into orbit next November, but without those parts, it could be July 1998 before liftoff. Among the experiments on the 16-day voyage, growing crops in weightlessness and observing how fire behaves in zero gravity. The fire experiments could help develop cleaner fuels and better firefighting techniques.
Being gimbaled as a steering check.
When Shuttle Columbia lifts off from the Kennedy Space Center, there will be 3 crews of astronauts on board. 1 to fly the spaceship and 2 others to conduct round-the-clock experiments, which could make life on Earth a lot better for millions of people.
We have scientists and investigators coming from around the world converging on the Payload Operations Control Center. It's from that location that they'll be talking to us on orbit to help us in our efforts to get the most science during the 16 days that we'll be in space. So it's exciting right now to see all that come together, and it's the payback time for all the work that everybody has put into this mission.
One series of experiments has the astronauts growing crops in weightlessness, from food to plants with medicinal value.
We're going to be growing some clover and spinach plants up in space just to start this process of learning how to grow and harvest plants up there. We're also doing some near-term research up there. We're taking both plants of sage and periwinkle on board, and these have great pharmaceutical applications down here on the Earth. Sage is useful for anti-malaria treatments, and the periwinkle is being used in some anti-cancer treatments.
Rookie astronaut Susan Still will pilot the shuttle. Janice Voss is payload commander in charge of all the experiments. They're both excited about this 16 days in space.
The part that really makes this mission exciting is the large number of experiments we have and the large variety of experiments.
A lot of times I get asked if I'm getting excited about the flight and how excited I'm getting, and really I've been in a training mode from the beginning of training until just the other day during the terminal countdown test when we were walking out of the ONC building for the first time in our space suits going to the shuttle to simulate a launch. And I noticed for the first time I started getting real excited about the upcoming launch.
Another group of experiments involves fire. When you strike a match on Earth, you know what happens. But in the microgravity of space, it's an entirely different flame. It doesn't burn like this, but in a perfect sphere. The astronauts will be conducting dozens of experiments on board the shuttle to see how fire works in space. The recent fire aboard Russia's Mir space station, which destroyed one of Mir's oxygen production systems and could have been disastrous, has caused the shuttle astronauts to take a closer look at fire safety in orbit.
I plan on taking 15 or 20 minutes to gather the crew together and just walk through not only fire but also the leak procedures, given our actual in-flight on-orbit configuration.
An extra added attraction this trip, a pilot's eye view of the launch and landing, which will put all of us on Earth in the cockpit for at least part of the mission. John Holloman, CNN reporting.
And liftoff for Columbia is scheduled for less than 3 hours from now, and CNN will bring it to you live when it happens.
Ready for its latest mission, you're looking at a live picture. You'll be seeing a report coming out.
All of our mid-deck experiments.
Flight controllers are ready right now to ignite tons of fuel and send the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia rocketing toward the heavens. Launch from Cape Canaveral, Florida is scheduled for just over 30 minutes from now.
Clean Time American Edition coming up next.
CDR, the cabin net redundancy config is complete. Copy, sir.
ATC,
Go.
Okay, just to let you know, they're going to have to cancel pending because we're not going to be done in 10 minutes.
We understand that.
And we have about 8.5 minutes remaining in this built-in hold. We are behind clearing the white room of the closeout crew. So there is a possibility that we'll be extending this built-in hold.
For the Shuttle Columbia, and some concerns as well about the space station Mir. John Zarella joins us now with the latest on both. John?
Good afternoon, Jonathan. Well, very briefly on the Shuttle Columbia, apparently some sort of a seal leak, and NASA has not been able to perform a leak test adequately enough, at least to its satisfaction. They're taking some time to take a look at it. We're not sure how long the delay will be, but they have until 4:30 Eastern Time here at the Kennedy Space Center in which to get Columbia off today. So it's a rather lengthy launch window. We will, of course, keep you advised as to the status of the Shuttle Columbia. In the meantime, they're also working problems on board the space station Mir. Yesterday, while astronauts were continuing an ongoing process of repairs to Mir's cooling system, they had to shut down the primary carbon dioxide scrubbing system. That is the system that removes carbon dioxide from the cabin air. The reason they had to shut that down was because it was, quote, getting a little warm, not taking any chances. It's not broken, NASA officials say, but they did shut it down. So right now, they are operating on backup carbon dioxide scrubbers, which are lithium hydroxide canisters, and operating on backup oxygen system. So on board Mir right now, some concerns that lots of backups are being employed and efforting to get some of the primary systems back up. So that's where we stand on both the space shuttle and the delay here and the ongoing efforts to get Mir's primary cooling system back up. Jonathan?
2 stories for Space Watchers. John Zarella, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And that brings us to an end of this American edition. I'm Jonathan Mann. Stay tuned. World Business Today is next. Hello, I'm Jonathan Mann. We're breaking away from World Business Today to go live now to the Kennedy Space Center for the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Columbia, the oldest shuttle in the NASA fleet, is to carry 7 astronauts aloft. The group is to work in shifts around the clock for 16 days, studying how fire burns in space. In just a moment, we'll be seeing that fire go off.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory, our research bridge to the space benefits of tomorrow.
Houston.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
Houston's now controlling. Columbia is rolling on course toward a 160 nautical mile high orbit, inclined 28.5 degrees to Earth's equator. Columbia already traveling 300 miles per hour. Columbia's 3 main engines is now throttled back to 2/3 throttle to prepare the spacecraft to pass through the area of maximum air pressure and go supersonic. Altitude now 2.5 miles, 1.5 miles east of the launch pad. Columbia is traveling 650 miles per hour.
$2 million liters of fuel powering Columbia as it takes off. As I mentioned before, this mission is going to concentrate on fire. Some 200 fires are going to be started by the 7 astronauts working aboard the shuttle and in its space lab. The object is to see how fire changes in the weightless environment. One interesting thing, this mission was delayed by a few minutes. It was delayed by an entire day, in fact, because of insulation that was discovered from within the shuttle. Technicians at Cape Kennedy say that that insulation, spotted as missing, might in fact have not been there for more than 13 years before they finally found it, checked it, and replaced it. But those replacement parts have been put into place, and now, as you can see, on a beautiful Florida afternoon, the Shuttle Columbia jets into space with 7 astronauts aboard.
For burnout and jettison of the twin solid rockets. Booster officer confirms good separation of the solid rockets.
Columbia, performance is nominal.
Copy, performance nominal.
That call indicating that Columbia's performance thus far is just as planned. Altitude now 34 miles. Columbia is traveling 3,000 miles per hour, 42 miles east of the Kennedy Space Center.
Columbia, 2-engine banjul.
Copy, 2-engine banjul.
Call indicating that Columbia could reach a transatlantic landing if needed. All systems continue to operate well.
Columbia gradually disappearing into the southern U.S. sky. 7 people aboard, heading off for 16 days on a mission to study fire. I'm Jonathan Mann at the CNN Center in Atlanta. There'll be more World Business Today right after this.
This has been a CNN Live event.
The actual launch of Columbia was delayed for about 19 minutes while NASA engineers worked out a couple of problems. They had a problem with sealing a hatch on the vehicle, and they also had some gaseous oxygen that had built up in one of the compartments in the shuttle, and they wanted to make sure that that was not a problem. Once all of those issues were cleared, Columbia was off and on its way. As I mentioned, one of the reasons why they're so rare, these daytime launches these days, are because many of the launches go to the Mir space station, and they have to launch those in the middle of the night in order to get to Mir. Well, Mir is having its share of problems these days. We learned about an hour and a half ago that yesterday, while astronaut Jerry Lininger, who was on the Mir, along with 2 Russian cosmonauts, while they were working on repair to the primary cooling loop system on Mir, they had to shut down the primary carbon dioxide scrubbing system. That's the system that purges the cabin air of carbon dioxide because it was getting, quote, too warm. NASA officials say it's not broken, it was just shut down as a direct result of the working on this cooling system. But that means that they are now on a backup carbon dioxide scrubbing system and a backup oxygen system because the oxygen system's been down for a couple of months. So some serious concerns now about Mir, growing concerns as to how long the astronaut and the cosmonaut will be able to continue up there with all of these mounting problems. NASA, of course, is hoping that the Russians can get these issues resolved and fixed and that there are no more snags because the Mir is getting old. It's 11 years old, Sonia, and it's beginning to show the wear and tear of age. Sonia?
John, if you can hear me, in how much danger are the astronauts up on Mir, and how soon can they get all those things fixed?
Well, right now they're saying that they think they can get the cooling system fixed by Monday. If they can't, there is a resupply vessel called Progress, which is taking off from Russia on Sunday. The resupply vessel will have plenty of these, quote, lithium hydroxide canisters, which are what they're using for scrubbing the carbon dioxide out, so they can get by for quite a while on those canisters. But it's just one thing after another right now, and the problems seem to be continuing to mount. And the difficulty that NASA has is that because of the communications problems between the Russians and the U.S. Space Agency, literally communications problems, NASA is always having to get explainers as to, well, how serious a situation is this? And until NASA is comfortable with the answers they're getting, there tends to be some times that there have been in the past of great concern.
John Zarella at the Kennedy Space Center. Thanks.
Space Shuttle Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory, our research bridge to the space benefits of tomorrow.
Houston. Roger, roll, Columbia.
Houston's now controlling. Columbia is rolling on course toward a 160 nautical mile high orbit, inclined 28.5 degrees to Earth's equator. Columbia already traveling 300 miles per hour. Columbia's three engines are now throttled back to 2/3 throttle to prepare the spacecraft to pass through the area of maximum air pressure and go supersonic. Altitude now 2.5 miles, 1.5 miles east of the launch pad. Columbia is traveling 650 miles per hour.
Mit einem Tag Verspätung ist die Raumfähre Columbia auf dem Weg ins All. 33 Experimente stehen während des 16-tägigen Flugs auf dem Programm. Vor allem mit Feuer und Treibstoffen soll die 7-köpfige Besatzung Versuche anstellen. Ziel: eine verbesserte Brandbekämpfung im Weltall und auf der Erde.
From CNN International, this is World News Europe.
About 90 minutes ago, the U.S. sent aloft the Space Shuttle Columbia. But against that backdrop, new worries emerged about the aging Russian Mir space station. With the latest on both stories, we're joined by CNN's John Zarella at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. John.
Fanola, well, the two problems all at once here today. At first, it was the Shuttle Columbia before liftoff, a slight delay of about 19 minutes. NASA had to troubleshoot a couple of minor problems. So about 19 minutes past its scheduled launch time, Columbia did take off. And it lifted off into a bright, bright Florida sky today, barely a cloud in the sky as Columbia lifted off on a 16-day science mission. There were concerns, as I mentioned, because they did have a delay because of a hatch problem. They had to take a look at that. And then there was some gaseous oxygen that was trapped in one of the compartments, and they wanted to make sure that that was not a problem. When those issues were cleared, the Shuttle Columbia did take off on a major science mission. Now, Columbia will be in orbit conducting all kinds of research over the next 2 weeks plus. And some of that research will have direct impact on the new space station once it gets up into orbit. But right now, NASA and the Russians are having their own problems with the old space station that's up there, Russia's space station Mir. Mir has been under some real stress lately, one thing after another, and the astronaut and his 2 cosmonaut friends, it's astronaut Jerry Lininger and the 2 cosmonauts he's with, have been plugging leaks in the dike, so to speak, right and left. First, it was oxygen failure breakdown, a cooling system breakdown, and now the latest yesterday was that some carbon dioxide scrubbers, those are actual scrubbers that remove carbon dioxide from the air, they had to be shut down as part of the cooling system repair process. So they're operating on backup oxygen systems and backup carbon dioxide removal systems. But earlier this week, CNN spoke with astronaut Jerry Lininger on board Mir, and he said he wasn't overly concerned about what's going on.
I'm concerned about them, and I stay alert to them, and I'm prepared to take action should we have further problems. We are prepared all the time to come home if need be. We have a Soyuz parked at one end of the Mir space station, and if the occasion occurs that we need to evacuate, we can go to the Soyuz and evacuate.
Now, the latest news we've just heard a few minutes ago from NASA officials in Houston, and they are the ones who are in direct contact with their Russian counterparts, are telling us that the cosmonauts on board Mir are now saying that they have some sealant that they have, and that they have actually located the leak in the cooling system. And they believe that with the sealant that they have on board, they can patch the leak temporarily. That should bring the temperature down inside the crew cabin, inside the Mir space station, and then allow them to get back on the primary carbon dioxide scrubber system. So that's a bit of good news. Of course, that repair work still has to be done. And on Sunday, from Russia, the Progress spacecraft is going to lift off, and that's a resupply ship heading towards Mir. And when it docks with Mir, it is carrying some more permanent fixes, repair parts and things that both astronaut Jerry Lininger and the cosmonauts that are on board can use to make some permanent fixes to the cooling oxygen system, and also that would allow them to get the scrubbers back online. So several problems being dealt with simultaneously on board the space station Mir. On Columbia, all is well. The spacecraft is in orbit above the Earth on its 16-day mission. Finola?
Well, John, let me ask you a question about the Mir space station. When it comes to deciding who's going to fix a problem such as this, where does the balance of judgment lie? Who calls the shots? Is it the Russians, or is it the Americans, or is it a joint effort?
No, it is primarily a Russian call. It's the Russian space station. The Russians are in complete control of it. The U.S. astronaut who is up there, Jerry Linenger, and the others who have been there before him are basically just on board for the ride, doing the work that they are, the tasks that they are assigned to do. And of course, this is all a precursor to ultimately building the International Space Station and getting U.S. astronauts up to speed on long durations in space. Of course, the Russians have much, much more experience in that. But the Russians are calling all the shots, and I'm sure that back in Houston, that makes them a little bit nervous because NASA's not used to taking a back seat to anyone.
Thank you very much, CNN's John Zarella at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory. Our research...
After a perfect launch, astronauts aboard the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia are in orbit, preparing to conduct a series of experiments. Most of the experiments are related to the planned International Space Station. The astronauts are expected to light more than 200 fires in a special chamber to see how flames spread in a weightless environment. They're also to conduct experiments on growing food. The shuttle is due back on April 20th. While the Columbia crew investigates how to better live in space, those already living aboard the Mir space station are having some difficulty. The U.S. Space Agency NASA says Mir is having trouble with a system that could jeopardize its air supply. And as CNN's Lyndon Souls reports, there have been other problems.
Originally launched in 1986, the Mir space station was designed to last until 1996. So here we are in 1997, and the Mir is still up there and filled with problems. In order to understand what the crew of the Mir is up against right now, let's go back to pictures from 1995. The first of the joint Shuttle Mir missions had begun. While the Shuttle Atlantis was docked to Mir, TV audiences got a tour of the space station's interior. Basically, the Mir is a collection of separate modules. The main module houses most of the station's life support systems. Additional life support was added with a new module. All of them hook into a main docking area, shown here with Shannon Lucid last year. The Mir's troubles first began to show up in February. The oxygen generators caught fire and smoke literally filled the space station. With the generators down, the astronauts need some other source of air to breathe. So they've been relying on chemical reaction generators, similar to the ones aboard most U.S. airlines. In a recent interview with the CNN network, U.S. astronaut Linenger, who's up in the Mir right now, said he wasn't overly concerned.
I'm not worried about them. I'm concerned about them, and I stay alert to them, and I'm prepared to take action should we have further problems. We are prepared all the time to come home if need be.
If they have to get home in a hurry, the astronauts would have to use the Soyuz capsule docked at the end of the main compartment. Its purpose? An escape pod if the Mir becomes uninhabitable. Lyndon Souls, CNN, reporting.
In Britannien versammelten sich die Fans der bevorstehenden Jahrtausendwende bei der berühmten Sternwarte Greenwich. Mit Feuerwerk und Champagner wurden wie zu Silvester die letzten 1000 Nächte bis zum Jahr 2000 begrüßt. Damit beginnt weltweit der Wettlauf darum, wer die größte Veranstaltung auf die Beine stellt. Unter anderem ist eine 24-Zeitzonen-Party geplant. Sie soll per Satellit übertragen werden. Doch nicht alle sehen der neuen Ära freudig entgegen. Auch apokalyptische Visionen haben Hochkonjunktur. Wie hier in New York spendet ein Blick in die Karten Trost, um immerhin Prognosen stellen zu können. Doch nicht nur Esoteriker machen sich Sorgen, sondern auch Vertreter der Computerindustrie. Viele alte Rechner sind nicht in der Lage, von 1999 auf das Jahr 2000 umzustellen.
Countdown für den Countdown an einem Ort, der als die Wiege unserer Zeit gilt, am Nullmeridian zu Greenwich. Genau 1000 Tage vor Beginn des neuen Jahrtausends wurde eine neue Digitaluhr in Gang gesetzt. Auf das Hundertstel genau zeigt sie an, wie viele Sekunden noch bis zur Jahrtausendwende vergehen. Die Zeitexperten in Greenwich sind mit ihrem Countdown vielen Jahrtausendbegeisterten rund um die Welt zuvorgekommen. Und zwar um exakt 24 Stunden. Aus gutem Grund, wie die Leiterin des Projektes bestätigt.
Wir sind am Freitag um Mitternacht gestartet, da wir ganze Tage zählen. Also 1000 ganze Tage bis zur Jahrtausendwende. Daher der Eindruck, wir wären einen Tag zu früh dran.
Die Uhr ist einzigartig. Sie empfängt die Atomzeitsignale von 24 Satelliten rund um die Erde. Ungenauigkeit ist da kein Thema. Und auch die Frage, wo denn das neue Jahrtausend beginnt, hat man sich in Greenwich nie ernsthaft gestellt.
Nun, wir wollen daran erinnern, dass das Jahrtausend nicht irgendwo beginnt, sondern hier am Nullmeridian um Mitternacht Greenwich-Zeit und nirgendwo sonst auf der Welt.
Das Maß aller Zeiten. Die Briten können es seit mehr als 100 Jahren für sich beanspruchen. Denn so lange schon verläuft der Nullmeridian durch die alte Sternwarte und bestimmt die sogenannte Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. Nach der richtet sich weltweit die Zeiteinteilung. Daran wird wohl auch das kommende Jahrtausend nichts ändern, so meinen die Briten, und stimmen sich ein auf die noch verbleibenden Tage bis zur Jahrtausendwende.
So schön kann Fliegen aussehen, wenn es klappt. Doch was einem Bilderbuchstart gleicht, ist das Ende einer Pannenserie. Denn die insgesamt 7 Astronauten an Bord der Columbia starteten 24 Stunden und 20 Minuten später als geplant. Erst sorgten die Triebwerke für Probleme und dann war eine Tür nicht richtig zu. Auch bei den Amerikanern geht trotz Hightech eben nicht alles glatt. Probleme haben seit gestern aber auch die Russen in der Raumstation Mir. Dort ist der Teil des Luftversorgungssystems ausgefallen, der Kohlendioxid herausfiltert. Jetzt läuft ein Notsystem, das nach US-Angaben aber nur für 8 Tage reicht. Bis dahin muss die Besatzung das System repariert haben. Bereits Ende Februar mussten die Kosmonauten, darunter auch der Deutsche Reinhold Ewald, eine gefährliche Situation bewältigen. Damals hatte es in der Mir gebrannt, nachdem eine Luftfilterpatrone explodiert war. Der Vorfall jetzt könnte ernste Folgen für die russisch-amerikanische Zusammenarbeit haben. Denn die Amerikaner wollen ihren nächsten Shuttleflug zu Mir verschieben, wenn bis dahin nicht alle Probleme beseitigt sind.
And hello and welcome to CNN's Early Prime. I'm Bill Hemmer at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Jean Meserve in Washington. NASA expects to know by tomorrow whether Space Shuttle Columbia will have to come home almost 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The problem is a faulty onboard fuel cell, one of 3 needed to power the shuttle and its payload of science experiments. CNN's Alan Duke has the latest.
Life in Earth's orbit this weekend has astronauts and cosmonauts alike busy troubleshooting problems on board their spacecraft. Soon after the crew of the Shuttle Columbia cranked up their Spacelab for 2 weeks of science experiments, NASA announced a problem that could force an early end to their mission. One of 3 fuel cells that provide power for the shuttle and Spacelab has weakened, a condition that could become dangerous.
You could actually have crossover and localized heating, exchange of hydrogen and oxygen in the cell, and you could even have localized fire. That's the very worst case.
The gradual power drop began before Friday's launch, but engineers aren't sure if it was related to a voltage spike in the same fuel cell that caused a brief delay in the countdown. It had declined 200 millivolts by Saturday afternoon, another 100, and the system would have to be turned off. But there is an indication that the decline may be leveling off.
Hopefully this fuel cell's performance will continue to stabilize and level off, and we'll go the full 2 weeks, and if not, we'll be prepared to go ahead and safe the fuel cell and come home if we need to ensure that we've got a safe orbiter and a safe return of the crew.
With just 2 of the 3 fuel cells working, there would be no reason to remain in orbit, since there would not be enough electricity to conduct Spacelab experiments.
We're planning for a 16-day mission, and all the operations are continuing as if it will be a 16-day mission. But at the same time, it's better to be safe than sorry, so we've started some planning.
NASA may have enough information by Sunday afternoon to decide if the mission will continue. Meanwhile, in another orbit, the Russian Mir is awaiting an unmanned rocket to deliver a repair kit for a failed oxygen generator and supplies to fix a leaky cooling system. Those leaks have heated up part of the space station and forced the shutdown of the system that removes carbon dioxide from their air. NASA's director for the Shuttle Mir program says the crew, including American astronaut Jerry Linegar, is holding up well despite recent troubles.
And I think right now they're in a good situation. Our people in Moscow talked to them this morning. They were all in very good spirits, even though it's a little warm in one of the modules.
Without the repairs, the crew would be forced eventually to abandon the Mir. Alan Duke, CNN reporting.
The man who came up with the idea for the Hubble Space Telescope is dead at the age of 82.
Lyman Spitzer Jr. died at his home in Princeton, New Jersey on Monday night. He was director of the Princeton Observatory for more than 30 years. In 1946, long before the first man-made satellites, Spitzer proposed putting a large telescope in orbit. Spitzer also launched the study of thermonuclear fusion. Princeton officials say he continued working on Hubble telescope data until the day he died.
Im Notfall kann die Columbia auch mit nur einem Stromgenerator auskommen, meinen die Experten. Doch ein solcher Flug würde ein zu hohes Risiko bedeuten. Die Sicherheitsvorschriften fordern eine vorzeitige Rückkehr zur Erde, sobald auch nur eines der 3 Geräte versagt. Bei einem völligen Stromausfall ist die sichere Landung gefährdet. Die Astronauten sind derzeit dabei, den Defekt mit Bordmitteln zu beheben. In den nächsten 2 Wochen sollen die 7 Besatzungsmitglieder insgesamt 33 wissenschaftliche Experimente vornehmen. Dazu gehören Tests zum Verhalten von Feuer in der Schwerelosigkeit sowie zum Anbau von Pflanzen. Der Grund: bei späteren Langzeitflügen müssten die Astronauten ihre Lebensmittel eventuell an Bord selbst anbauen. Ihre Experimente unternimmt die Crew im Raumlabor Spacelab, einer Entwicklung der Europäischen Raumfahrtagentur ESA. Es war bereits 30 Mal mit einem Shuttle im All.
The crew of Columbia awaits word on whether their high-flying dreams will have to come down to earth.
Astronauts aboard the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia are rearranging their schedule. They're trying to decide which experiments they should do first in case mechanical problems force a premature end to their mission. A problem with one of the spacecraft's 3 fuel cells has had NASA controllers worried, but now, after some quick repair work in space, things are looking up a bit.
Since that change in configuration of the wiring, the trend in the degradation of that fuel cell has stabilized, and it has been hanging in although a rather high level, not terribly far from the red line area, at least has leveled off and has been holding there for several hours now. So while some plans have been put in place, contingency plans for a potentially shortened mission, those have not been put into effect yet because of this apparent stabilization in this fuel cell. And flight controllers will continue to watch that throughout the day and monitor its performance very carefully.
Within an hour, NASA officials are expected to announce their plans for the rest of the mission. We're going to try to bring you that decision as it is announced. Shuttle began a 16-day science mission on Friday, but a leaking generator was discovered soon after liftoff, and the American Space Agency, NASA, has decided to bring the 7 astronauts home on Tuesday. The astronauts were disappointed upon hearing the news.
Okay, that's certainly disappointing, but we know you guys put your best effort forward and you're doing the right thing, and we appreciate all the work that's going into that. 3/22/14, and I imagine between now and then we'll keep marching forward with as much science as we can.
It's only the 3rd time that NASA has ended a shuttle mission early.
Die amerikanische Raumfähre Columbia muss ihre Mission vorzeitig beenden. Die Weltraumbehörde NASA teilte mit, die Columbia werde bereits am Dienstag auf die Erde zurückkehren. An Bord der Raumfähre gibt es technische Probleme. Einer der 3 Stromgeneratoren ist defekt. Die Columbia sollte ursprünglich bis zum 20. April im All bleiben.
Frank, the Space Shuttle Columbia's mission is being, as had been feared, cut short because of problems with an electrical generator. The power-generating fuel cell is one of 3 on the satellite. NASA says the shuttle can land safely on 2, but that all 3 must be running properly and at full strength if the orbiter is to remain in space. As seen live on CNN within the past hour, shuttle managers say they're being cautious to keep the problem from becoming more serious.
We really do not have enough data to really understand the situation that's going on well enough to define it precisely. And what I mean by that, we have to make some assumptions in terms of what the scenarios may well be, and in that course of making those assumptions, we assume the worst-case scenario, which is the one that would lead to the crossover situation. We could potentially have a breakthrough in the system, and we'd be mixing oxygen and hydrogen. That would result in a fire, and I suppose potentially, if you let it go long enough, an explosion. But we're not going to come close to that kind of a scenario.
CNN's space affairs correspondent John Holloman is standing by today in Lakeland, Florida. We're joining John by telephone. John, you heard the NASA briefing. Can you quantify any further than NASA did just how serious this fuel cell problem is?
This is one of the three most serious problems that's ever happened on board a space shuttle while it was in orbit, Bob. The shuttle has only been brought home early 3 times in the history of the program because of a problem with the systems on board. This is one of those 3 times. The shuttle makes electricity by mixing hydrogen and oxygen in these 3 fuel cells, and the fact that one of the 3 has failed and could go critical if they don't shut it off is a big problem. One thing we should point out, mission managers say they are going to shut down this faulty fuel cell in the next 2 hours to prevent any possibility of anything like a fire or explosion from happening. Bob?
You say go critical. What do you mean by that?
What they mean by that, what the NASA people mean by that is having the hydrogen and the oxygen mixing in a way that doesn't make electricity but makes an explosion. That's what gets the shuttle into orbit in the first place with the 3 main engines. The 2 ingredients shouldn't be mixed in a volatile way, and that's what they're worried about with this fuel cell. That's why they're shutting it off in a couple of hours.
Right. Does this seem to be the kind of problem, John, that could now slow down in some larger sense the overall space program?
Don't think so. The reason being there are a lot of fuel cells. The shuttle is designed to have things that plug in, to replace things. This fuel cell isn't the one that stays on this shuttle. It'll be taken out. It'll probably be taken out of service for a long time, replaced with one that doesn't have a problem like this so that the shuttle program can continue. A more serious problem, the fact that CNN reported last week that the construction of the new space station, the main job for the shuttle over the next 6 years, is being delayed by at least 6 months.
All right, thanks. John Holloman joining us today by telephone from Lakeland, Florida. This Columbia shuttle mission was originally scheduled to last 16 days. Now it's lasting only a quarter as long. NASA plans to land the shuttle on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday at 2:34 p.m. Eastern Time in Florida, and CNN will bring that to you live. I'm Bob Kane.
Kurz nach dem Start der Columbia verlor einer der Stromgeneratoren der Raumfähre an Leistung. Die Besatzung hatte noch versucht, den Fehler mit Bordmitteln zu beheben. Die Bodenkontrolle beorderte die Columbia jedoch zurück. Nach den Bestimmungen der amerikanischen Raumfahrtbehörde NASA müssen alle Generatoren während der gesamten Mission einwandfrei funktionieren. Der 22. Columbia-Flug stand von Beginn an unter einem ungünstigen Stern. Wegen fehlender Isolierung musste der Start um 24 Stunden verschoben werden. Kurz vor dem Countdown gab es Probleme mit den Abschlussluken. Die 7-köpfige Besatzung hatte im All mehr als 30 Experimente durchführen sollen. Unter anderem waren Versuche mit Feuer geplant.
Ein Stromgenerator ist defekt. Die Columbia war erst am Freitag gestartet. 16 Tage lang sollte sie im All bleiben. Jetzt aber muss sie bereits am Dienstag wieder zurück. Eine direkte Gefahr für die Astronauten bestehe aber nicht, versichert die NASA.
Vor allem die Astronauten an Bord der Columbia sind enttäuscht. 16 Tage wollten sie im Weltall forschen, um herauszufinden, welchen Einfluss Schwerelosigkeit auf physikalische Prozesse hat, zum Beispiel bei der Entwicklung von Feuer. Die Risiken, die Mission fortzusetzen, seien zu groß, entschied die NASA-Kontrollstation in Houston und ordnete die Rückkehr zur Erde für Dienstag an. Kurz nach dem Abheben am Freitag kommentierte NASA, ein Start wie im Bilderbuch. Doch schon wenige Stunden später stellte die Flugkontrolle fest, dass einer von 3 Generatoren nicht richtig funktionierte. Die Astronauten meinten, der Defekt hindere sie nicht, ihre Mission fortzusetzen. Doch der beschädigte Generator könnte überhitzen und womöglich explodieren. Deshalb muss er abgeschaltet werden. Zwar reichen die 2 verbleibenden grundsätzlich aus, doch nun fehlt ein Reservesystem. Ein weiterer Ausfall ist nicht mehr zu beherrschen.
The U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia will end its 16-day mission 11 days early. A problem with one of the spacecraft's 3 fuel cells has dogged the astronauts since Friday's takeoff. NASA scientists tried to work around it, but a couple of hours ago they ordered Columbia to cut short its flight and come home Tuesday. Here's how the shuttle's commander reacted to the news.
Okay, that's certainly disappointing, but we know you guys put your best effort forward and you're doing the right thing, and we appreciate all the work that's going into that. 3:22:14, and I imagine between now and then we'll keep marching forward with as much science as we can.
Cosmonauts and one astronaut aboard the Russian space station Mir aren't having a smooth flight either. A recent fire and a series of mechanical failures has knocked out the spacecraft's main air filtration system. A rescue rocket carrying repair equipment is on its way. In the meantime, the crew is using a backup system.
US-Raumfähre Columbia im All findet wegen eines Problems bei der Stromversorgung ein vorzeitiges Ende. Wie die NASA mitteilte, ist die Rückkehr des Shuttle für Dienstag geplant. Der Grund? An einem der 3 Generatoren an Bord sei kurz nach dem Start am Freitag die Spannung abgefallen. Ursprünglich sollte der Flug bis zum 20. April dauern. Die 7 Astronauten an Bord versuchten heute noch so viele Experimente wie möglich zu beenden. Es ist das 3. Mal, dass ein Shuttle-Flug wegen technischer Probleme abgebrochen werden muss.
It will shorten the mission.
Scheduled to last at least a fortnight, Columbia's science mission will now end after only 4 nights. Ground controllers sent up the word less than 48 hours after launch.
And of course,
okay, that's certainly disappointing, but we know you guys put your best effort forward and you're doing the right thing, and we appreciate all the work that's gone into that.
Commander Jim Halsell and his 6 crewmates have good reason for disappointment. They were to conduct dozens of experiments in a laboratory anchored in Columbia's cargo bay. Crew members were ready to light a few hundred fires to learn more about combustion in the absence of gravity. Ironically, it was concern about fire which prompted plans for a premature return to Earth. One of 3 onboard electrical generators, so-called fuel cells, is not operating properly, although engineers are not sure why.
We assume the worst-case scenario, which is the one that would lead to the crossover situation.
Translated, liquid hydrogen and oxygen, which fuel the fuel cell, mix or cross over as the device becomes severely depleted.
Hydrogen and oxygen, when they mix, is not a nice sight, and that's the potential that we preclude, and our limits are set up to preclude us getting close to that point. And so that's the situation and the potential danger, but as I mentioned, we'll by terminating the operation here, we can preclude getting close to that kind of a situation.
The situation could lead to a fire and possibly an explosion, although NASA officials stress there is no danger of that happening now that they have pulled the plug on the faulty cell. But with only 2 of the 3 fuel cells operating, NASA rules require flight controllers to plan an orderly, methodical return to Earth.
This is something that we don't want to take weeks of risk by staying on orbit. We'd like to minimize that risk.
It is only the 3rd time in shuttle history that NASA has cut short a mission. In 1981, it was also a bulky fuel cell which brought Columbia home 3 days early. In 1991, Atlantis made an unscheduled U-turn after a navigational device failed.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of...
Shortly before NASA flight controllers gave the green light to launch this shuttle mission, engineers did notice some voltage problems with Columbia's now ailing fuel cell. But engineers felt their readings were not showstoppers.
I've often said that 20/20 hindsight is a wonderful tool. I can get it right most every time.
Now NASA engineers will double-check those pre-launch readings, hoping in the future they may clearly see the signs of trouble they missed this time around. Miles O'Brien, CNN, reporting.
Well, Columbia isn't the only spacecraft in orbit or in trouble. A rescue rocket lifted off Sunday, carrying equipment needed for vital repairs on the Russian space station Mir. 2 Russian cosmonauts and an American astronaut are on board the station. Mir's air filtration system is malfunctioning, and the crew is now relying on a backup system to provide breathable air. A fire and a series of mechanical failures knocked out Mir's primary oxygen generator and caused leaks in its cooling system.
And repair parts are on the way to the Russian space station Mir. An unmanned rocket is carrying equipment to fix Mir's broken oxygen generator and bringing new parts for the aging air conditioning system. 2 cosmonauts and American astronaut Jerry Lininger are aboard Mir. Space Shuttle Atlantis will take a brand new oxygen generator to Mir next month. Atlantis will also deliver a replacement for Lininger.
In just a few days that we've had, we've managed to get results that were described to me by the investigators. They told me before the mission, hey, look, if we get a single data point, we'll be ecstatic, because these experiments are so difficult to do and they've never been done before, that result in itself will make us very happy. And we've gotten that many times over in just these 4 days. So on the one hand, I'm disappointed, but on the other hand, I'm very happy that in the short time we've had, we've gotten them some good results that'll move them on into the future.
The same day that Columbia is scheduled to return to Earth, a rocket will be docking with the Russian space station Mir. The unmanned Pioneer spacecraft is carrying urgently needed supplies, including a replacement for a faulty air purifier. The three-member crew has been relying on an emergency system. And now for the entire U.S. weather picture, here's CNN's Byron Miranda.
Let's start off in the upper Midwest with the weather watch. You're going to see a flash flood watch through today and through the southwestern section of Minnesota, and then move it over to the Great Lakes. High wind advisories. Boy, it had been windy through the northern plains and Minnesota. The winds have diminished there, but now it's windy through the Great Lakes, so watch out if you're here. Highs, very, very, very unseasonable, very cold from the northern section of the United States in the 20s. But, you know, this is actually good news for the northern section, from the Minnesota area back towards North Dakota, South Dakota. Hopefully, there won't be any snow melting in the next couple of days. They've seen a lot of flooding here. Go all the way down south, and you can see the yellow. So big contrast here from the blue, cold temperatures north, and then warm temperatures through the southern section of the United States. 82 degrees for Miami, 72 for Los Angeles. In fact, it's going to be 72 for the next couple of days in Southern California. Relatively nice in the southwest. Now, later today, high pressure dominates the southwest, the Great Basin, California, towards the Pacific Northwest. However, scattered showers are in the forecast for Portland and Seattle. Very light rain there, though. High pressure dominating the eastern half. In fact, it's just high pressure is dominating most of the nation. Very tranquil from the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, southeast down to Miami. Now, Miami has a slight chance of seeing a thunder shower as this frontal system continues to push off the coast, but the eastern seaboard is quiet. You will see some light snow in the next 24 to 48 hours through the upper Midwest towards the northern plains, but only light snow, and that's good news there. Take a look.
Astronauts are working at a feverish pace to conduct long-planned scientific experiments. Officials predict that only about 15% of the experiments planned will actually be completed. NASA is concerned the faulty generator could cause an explosion on board. 2 generators are still working. The shuttle is now scheduled to land approximately 24 hours from now, and CNN will cover the landing live Tuesday on World News.
Elaborate global parties are planned for Times Square in New York, the pyramids in Egypt, the Acropolis in Greece, the Taj Mahal in India, the Great Wall of China, and at the Eiffel Tower in Paris, where a giant illuminated sign this weekend begins the 1,000-day countdown. For those seeking a more spiritual entrance to the third millennium, Pope John Paul will lead the week of celebrations in Rome, while others will be held in Jerusalem. But let's face it, the millennium is a global marketing dream. The Disney company is ecstatic that the Roman numerals for 2000 are MM, which of course in today's world stands for Mickey Mouse. The important thing is to get into the Millennium Act and get in first. Which brings us to the international dateline. From the eastern tip of Siberia to New Zealand, governments and promoters are vying to be the place to welcome the new millennium. How far will they go? One tiny island nation, Kiribati, has arbitrarily moved the international dateline so that instead of being the last country to greet the millennium, it will be the first. The power of the millennial idea lies not only in religious belief, but also in the iconic symbolism of that number. Purists may say, and they're correct, that the millennium begins in 2001, but our deepest human instincts are drawn to those 3 zeros. When the current millennium began, human instincts said the Earth was flat and was at the center of the universe. How quaint, we might think, or how tragic that 1,000 years later there are still some who believe that comets are omens and that suicide can lead to salvation on a spaceship. Nearly 1,000 years ago, Christian crusaders, driven by belief in their scriptures, battled Muslim believers for control of the Holy Land. Today, Jews and Muslims, driven by their scriptures, fight for the same land. Faith is not limited by the calendar, even in a millennium. Speaking of which, the year 2000 will be 5,761 in the Jewish calendar, 1,421 for Muslims, and in China, it will be the year 4,698. That may add perspective, but it will not diminish the marketing and media onslaught of this millennium. Here it comes, ready or not. Garrick Utley, CNN, New York.
And one group of people that is very ready for the millennium is the futurists, people who predict and forecast what is to come. Their business has never been better. A short time ago, I spoke to one of them, David Pierce Snyder of the World Future Society. And the first thing we discussed was the fact that the millennium celebrations may be a little premature.
There's no year zero. The first year was 1. Then the end of the 1,000 years has to be the 2000. So the real millennium doesn't begin till 2001. However, because it's like our speedometer on our car, the rollover of all the digits is from 1999 to 2000. So conventional wisdom is the millennium starts with the year 2000. Technically speaking, it doesn't. And in fact, it only starts in the year 2000 for the Western Orthodox faith. Eastern Orthodox faith goes with the Julian calendar, which is off about 4 months from the Western calendar, which is Gregorian. So even in the West, we don't agree quite when the millennium starts.
And speaking of calendars, the Christian calendar is one of tens of calendars. Will this be a truly global event?
Well, the dominance of the world economy by Western cultures and economies means that, it's going to be a big deal worldwide, even though in Southeast Asia, it's actually the year 4,600 something or other. And of course, in Israel, it's around 5,000. And by the Islamic calendar, it's 1429. But even so, because it's just like all the air traffic controllers speak English, and all pilots are required to speak English, so that we have one language to communicate with. We now refer to the year 2000 that's coming up as the year 2000 CE, which refers to Common Era. We're trying to say, for the moment, guys, since we're the dominant running culture for the world, why don't we all celebrate our birthday, our 2,000 years. I don't know whether or not we'll make the same accommodation for other faiths and other cultures when they get to be passing their millenniums. But since we're in charge, we get to say that.
Before we go further into the future, let's go back to the year 999 when people greeted the year 1000. What were they thinking? What were their anticipations?
There was a considerable fear on the part of the general population and to some degree on the part of the fathers of the Christian church at that time, because indeed when Christianity started, the common belief among all the followers were that Christ was going to come back just at any moment and that the whole world would come to an end any time. And then after several hundred years passed, the church held several convocations and concluded that obviously the return was not imminent. So when would it be? And they settled on the year 1000. So indeed, as Western culture rolled up to the year 1000, there were hysterical demonstrations and mass suicides, things like that, in anticipation of the end of the world as we knew it. And it came and went, and nothing happened. And interestingly enough, from that moment came the rebirth of Western culture. It was almost as if Western culture said, oh, things aren't going to come to an end in the year 1000. Well, then we better get cracking. And suddenly you had Charlemagne, and you had the rise of the Western kingdoms, and the beginning of progress out of the Dark Ages and into the Renaissance and all these wonderful things that followed.
Why do people feel the urge to party and to rejoice at the coming of a new millennium?
Well, it's a birthday, right? I mean, technically speaking, this is the 2000th birthday of Western civilization in modern sense. And if we look back over that 2,000 years, we've had some pretty terrible times, world wars and famines, and, the 14th century was so terrible, they had the 100 Years' War, lasted the entire century. And yet, with all these plagues and everything, we can look back and say, look how far Western culture has come. Look what wonderful things we've achieved, our cities, our knowledge, our institutions. And what's more, we are bringing that development to lift the quality of life of everybody in the world. And indeed, that should be a cause for celebration. And I think the Europeans are, even with their trouble, they are planning big celebrations in Europe. There's a Millennium Foundation that is giving out grants all over Europe for special celebrations, and the British are building the biggest dome in the world over the Greenwich Meridian in London because that's where the world was divided, and we set the time up originally about 150 years ago. So they're going to have big celebrations there, and we should. We absolutely should celebrate the achievement of Western culture and its mission to bring stability and prosperity to the whole world.
Days to fall because of a faulty generator. The Shuttle Columbia astronauts are headed back to Earth. The crew only had time to make a small dent in the flight's 33 scheduled experiments. The shuttle is scheduled to land in just about 8 hours from now at the Kennedy Space Center. CNN plans to carry that live. You see the times there on your screen.
The wintry weather will continue across the north-central United States, aggravating flood problems in the region and making it very difficult to get rid of all of the snow that's accumulated. I'm meteorologist Valerie Voss from the CNN International Weather Center. If we put our forecast weather map into motion, a trough of low pressure drops through the Great Lakes. A few snow showers associated with this could accumulate to some depth of maybe a few inches in the lake effect areas around the Great Lakes. We see a frontal boundary right through the Rocky Mountains with rain and snow across that region. Some showers and thunderstorms are in the forecast through the southern plains, pushing over into the Great Lakes region and across Florida with time. Another system drops in through the northwest across the Great Basin, bringing some more cool air into the southwestern part of the United States.
Das sind die schneebedeckten Alpen und die Täler dazwischen sind inzwischen schneefrei und zeichnen sich recht gut ab. Die Schneesituation für einen 9. April ist eigentlich ausgezeichnet, nur dass die Sonne natürlich langsam die Südhänge abräumt mit dem Schnee. Ja, auch in Süddeutschland sind die Wälder recht gut zu erkennen, wie hier der Schwarzwald beispielsweise. Nach Norden hin, in Norddeutschland wird es dann auch weiß, das ist natürlich kein Schnee. Das waren die Wolken heute, die auch direkt an der Küste ein bisschen Regen brachten.
The unmanned progress craft is bringing badly needed spare parts to Mir. Mir's crew is relying currently on a backup system for breathable air, and we're watching now live pictures from Mir, pictures of the docking. And now we go to John Holloman at the CNN Center. John?
The Mir, but Mir has the camera that's looking out the window. You can see crosshairs sort of dividing the TV screen into 4 equal parts. And just to the lower right of that, of those crosshairs, there is, it's called a docking target. It's something that the Russians invented. The Americans were able to get from the Russians. It's a piece of metal that sticks out more than a foot from the side of the Progress vehicle. And the crew on board Mir, and we're about to lose this picture. You can see it's fading away, but it's looking very, very much like the docking is going to be very successful. They're within a matter of inches of getting this docking to be conducted. This is the final push to docking. And as I said earlier, Mir has an automated docking system on board. And I'd be willing to predict we're going to lose the picture totally just as the docking.
Yeah, I was going to say, when will we know? When
well, I'm going to keep watching the picture, which is just, it's mostly, you know, fuzzy stuff. And wait a minute, there it comes. It's coming back again. It appears to me that because we can't see that target anymore, the 2 ships have successfully connected. My colleague John Zarella is at the Kennedy Space Center, where the other big story of the day is unfolding, the space shuttle. John, last week I was out in Colorado accepting an award for you and me for space coverage on CNN, and you were down there in the midst of this, the various problems on board Mir as well as the shuttle launch. What do you make of this? Looks to me, at least, like the docking was successful.
Certainly the folks at NASA back in Houston have got to be breathing a little easier because there were serious concerns, John, about what would happen and what would need to be done if they could not get progress up there with the fix-it kits that are on board. So this is a significant step to continue on with the mission of the cosmonauts. And of course, later next month, we're going to have another U.S. astronaut go up to replace astronaut Lininger. So this is significant today, and certainly it'll be significant when they get Columbia back here on the ground safely in just about an hour. John?
All right, John Zarella, the deorbit burn to bring the astronauts out of orbit seems to be also beginning within the next second or two, if it hadn't already. So everything's coming together pretty nicely.
Everything is ship-shape.
That's right. I lost a little sleep last night over both of these problems, so I'll sleep better tonight, I hope.
All right, John. Thanks very much.
So in an hour, we can expect the space shuttle to land, but right now we're going to go over to the White House.
Yeah, and the Rose Garden, and President Clinton and Canadian Prime Minister Chrétien.
Mr. Chrétien's first visit to the White House since becoming Prime Minister of Canada. They've had their morning meetings about trade and some of the differences between the two countries, and now they're about to meet reporters out there in the Rose Garden. It looks like a beautiful day in Washington.
Please be seated. Thank you.
CNN's coverage of a live event.
Columbia is in sight, John Holloman.
You're right, Lou. Nice picture for people who have relatives on board that space shuttle, because things could have gone very much differently. This is a picture from a camera that can see as far as 60 miles away. The shuttle is considerably closer to the Kennedy Space Center than 60 miles away now. The astronauts tried to use their cockpit camera to let us have a look out the front window during that commercial break. Picture didn't show much, but they may be able to switch back to it again.
It was showing those flashing lights. What were those?
That was a reflection off the window of one of the computer panels inside the shuttle orbiter. Yeah. It's,
something real interesting.
You didn't miss anything.
No, you really didn't miss much. There's another side view of the shuttle. It's been through the Earth's atmosphere. The bottom of that thing got heated up to more than 1,000 degrees as it moved through the atmosphere. And as you know, it has those insulation tiles all over it to keep the folks inside comfy as it does this.
Are we going to hear the sonic boom here?
John Zarella is on the ground at the landing strip. John, join us. Have you heard any sonic boom yet?
We just did. Just before Lou said, "Are we going to hear it?" We heard the twin.
I knew it was
boom.
close. I knew it was close.
Haven't missed anything, folks.
Another indication that Columbia is very close to us. Now we can see the countdown clock at 2 minutes 37 seconds and counting on down. So we ought to be able to actually see the vehicle coming into sight very shortly, John. The winds have laid down a little bit here right now, so it looks as if all is going to be just fine here as far as the weather goes.
John, you might want to look to the east. The shuttle is down east of the runway now from our look on TV, and he's making his final turn to line up on, I guess it's the south to north runway that they've decided to use for this landing. Jim Holtzell in the left seat at the controls. Susan Still, the pilot, on the right.
500 feet. We can see the vehicle from here now, John. Speed basically to the south of us. It is moving very slowly around and making that turn to line up with the runway.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sight here today. I got a chance to take a small airplane. As you know, I'm a pilot, and I got to fly virtually this course over the runway one day. They wouldn't let me put the wheels of my plane on it. They've never let somebody, not an astronaut, do it.
They're those flashing lights you were talking about.
That's the view out the window. And you can see the shuttle sort of on its side. In a minute, you'll see the dark stuff on the right of your screen sort of turn around so that it's lined up and looks like the Earth. They're in that final turn. The white thing in the from the center top of your screen down is the runway.
This is impressive stuff. I mean, you know, remember the first time we watched this, we said, wow, but we're still saying wow.
Yeah, it's quite a thing. And this is one of the toughest jobs. Actually, for the crew of the shuttle, this is the toughest job, landing this thing. Because it is not like an airplane where if you miss your first pass at the runway, you get a chance to go around and do it again. They got to hit the runway. It is long. It is beautiful. From my seat in my plane as I flew over, I said, wow, it's a good runway. It's almost as wide as it is long. I mean, it's...
Now, is the malfunctioning fuel generator having any impact on landing?
Well, the shuttle uses electricity from to make things go from the stick that the commander and pilot hold to the wing surfaces. But the reason they have 3 is because they only need 2. And so the 2 that are still working are doing the job here. The third one's been totally disconnected.
Has this camera been on before during a landing?
First time we've ever seen
this angle before. This is great. I sat in a cockpit once at an L-1011 with the same view coming in. It's incredible.
2 spaceships a little similar. The L-1011 carries more folks. This one costs more money.
Oh,
here we go.
It stayed with that other one.
Final flare and the touchdown attitude.
This is astronaut Ken Cockrell, you can hear in the background.
Mechanics officer reports landing gears down in lock. Main gear touchdown. Drag chute deploy. Nose gear touchdown.
And I would imagine a mixture of relief and disappointment aboard the Columbia shuttle, among those who wish they'd been up there that other 12 days.
John Zarella. Let's bring Zarella in because he's standing right there. What does it look like, John?
Well, John, it just rolled right in front of us and now down to the other end of the runway where it's about to come to a stop. And it was really fascinating because the shuttle training aircraft was flying just overhead as Columbia made it to the ground. So it was a fascinating shot. You had both space vehicles, well, both the shuttle training aircraft and the shuttle coming in simultaneously with the trainer just about, maybe 100 feet overhead of the shuttle Columbia as it was landing. Looked like a picture-perfect landing. Any concerns over the weather, the crosswinds here certainly didn't affect the pilot and the crew as they brought Columbia home. Again, probably a little bit of mixed emotions, disappointment they couldn't finish the mission, but glad to be back on Earth with the problems that they faced with the fuel cell. John?
Let's listen into NASA, see if we can hear the first words of the commander and crew now that they're back on Earth. It's quite an impressive spaceship. There'll be about an hour of effort now to make sure that there are no poisonous fumes coming out of the shuttle that would be, damaging to people on the ground. You can see it, though. You can see the heat rising off the top of this thing. Some of that heat is left over from the re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere, and some because it's just such a beautiful, nice, warm day.
While we're here, John, while we're looking at these pictures, perhaps you can tell us what happened. What was it? Solar flare?
Well, we're just beginning to get some information about this, an event that happened on the sun yesterday, Lou. You may remember, our viewers may remember, that more than a month ago, back in January, there was a communication satellite that suddenly got out of touch with the Earth, and an investigation of what happened there indicated that it was probably a pulse of energy from the sun that sort of fried the electronics on that satellite. Well, it turns out that there was another event on the sun that happened yesterday. NASA, in fact, the international space agencies, have satellites way out in space, halfway between Earth and Sun.
Toward Columbia.
Houston, we will be performing the hydraulic load test.
It's an interesting picture. It's a vehicle, one of the crew shuttle support vehicles that's rolling down the runway toward the spaceship on its way there. At any rate, had another solar flare event yesterday. At the speed of light, it takes the radiation from that event.
For Jim, we're ready for ammonia activation on page 5-8.
They're purging some lines on the shuttle now to get any noxious fumes out, and they use ammonia to do that. But anyway, this thing happened, and it'll be here on Earth sometime tomorrow. A lot of people are spending a lot of time right now trying to determine whether it's going to be something that would be damaging to satellites or
anything they could do about it?
Yeah, what
can they do about it?
Can't stop it. It's a big voomp of gamma rays out from the sun.
What kind of problems would it cause when it hits the Earth?
We got the ozone layer in the atmosphere to keep us all right, but out there above the Earth, in the area where the shuttle is, for example, in the area where communication satellites are, 22,000 miles away, it has has potential to do some damage.
What if that had happened today instead of yesterday? And well, I guess they wouldn't have brought the shuttle back then.
Well, I don't know. I think getting the whatever you've got down here inside the ozone layer is better. But from the shuttle is shielded. The Mir space station shielded. Anything that carries people has a lot of shielding on the outside to make sure that things like this don't hurt the folks inside. It may result in nothing happening on Earth. It might disrupt communications. As you know, the cable news network and the various networks connected to us use satellites virtually exclusively to get the news in. John Zarella is sitting there in Florida, and there's a satellite transmitter right next to him pumping the pictures and sounds back here to us.
So if we're off the air tomorrow...
if you don't see us here tomorrow, it's probably just this solar flare, and we'll be,
we'll be back eventually.
Okay.
One last question. Is this your lunch on the front of that tie?
This is nice, isn't it? This is Shuttle Discovery. I picked it up in Colorado last week. Next shuttle launch is going to be the 15th of May. It's going to be Atlantis. It's going to go to Mir, provided anybody's there for it to go and visit. And it'll bring some additional new equipment to the Mir space station. So we'll be here and have a couple weeks of fun starting in the middle of next month.
All right.
Would you ride the shuttle if you had the chance?
I talked to the administrator of NASA last week. I said, what do I have to do to ride on the shuttle? He made some comment about $10,000 a pound to send things in space. And lose a little weight, get in shape, Holloman, we'll talk.
There's some incentive if I ever heard them.
I started my diet that day.
Okay.
See how it goes.
John Holloman is on his diet. The Space Shuttle Columbia is safely on the ground at the Kennedy Space Center, and
we're taking a break.
Then you pull the nose up a little bit more, one more time, to establish the final flare and the touchdown attitude.
The mechanics officer reports landing gears down in lock. Main gear touchdown. The drag chute deploy. Nose gear touchdown.
This has been a CNN Live event.
A defective fuel cell forced an early return for the shuttle just 4 days into what was to have been a 16-day science mission. NASA cut short the $500 million mission after voltage dropped in one of 3 electric generating fuel cells. Such a generator problem could possibly have triggered an explosion. Space officials say it will be difficult to determine why the cell malfunctioned, since any evidence was likely tainted when it was shut down. Earlier, the crew of the Russian Mir space station got a welcome boost with the arrival of a supply ship named Progress. But as CNN's Betsy Aaron reports, some think the aging Mir needs more than just a few supplies.
What a dream the Russians had back in February of 1986 when Mir was launched. This scientific home away from home with all the comforts of home, where exploration of space and Earth would be tackled safely. Well, the 11-year-old Mir space station, originally designed to work for 5 years, is showing its age. Listen to Leary Polyakov. He's the cosmonaut who's spent more time in space than any other cosmonaut or astronaut. His last mission was 14 months.
Now we reached a point when, like in a car, it works for a long time, but all of a sudden it starts to gradually break down. First you need to tune up, then you need a more substantial repair, and then you need to toss it out at the dump. But we've been fixing it again and again.
In just the past month and a half, a flash fire used up 3 of the station's 10 fire extinguishers. The main oxygen generating system failed. The motion control system was causing trouble. There was partial power outage. The 3 men on board, 2 Russian cosmonauts, 1 American astronaut, are relying on a backup oxygen system where they burn oxygen-producing chemicals several times a day. The chemicals are similar to those used in submarines. Russian scientists have been saying there's no reason for concern. NASA wants a safety review before any more Americans fly the Mir. With the arrival and docking of the Progress 34 cargo spacecraft, Russian scientists are predicting all problems will be solved. Progress is carrying 50 kilograms of pure oxygen, fire extinguishers, spare parts, fuel, scientific equipment, food, and personal presents from relatives. What Mir and the next generation of Russian space stations called Alpha desperately need is money. Over the past 5 years, close to half the scientific talent has left the program, leading to this.
The total volume of space research is 7 times smaller than we were doing in 1989.
And after all, research was supposed to be what Mir was all about. That's why the Americans paid the Russians $400 million for the right to get on board. When all the repairs are made, what everyone is banking on is that Mir will get a warranty to fly until the year 2001. Betsy Aaron, CNN, Moscow.
Hello and welcome. I'm Miles O'Brien. This week brings yet another tantalizing clue that the conditions might be right for life in another part of the universe. It comes from new pictures of Jupiter's moon Europa, pictures that one scientist calls mind-blowing. The images provide strong evidence that Europa has an ocean of water hidden underneath an icy crust. They also suggest there may have been volcanic activity there. The combination of water and heat would provide an environment that could support life. These pictures were taken by NASA's Galileo space probe last month as it flew less than 400 miles above Europa's surface. Scientists would love to send a probe to land on Europa to explore further, but they say if NASA funded such a mission, it would be at least 10 years before a craft would touch down on Europa. A wave of energy swept across the sun on Monday and blasted toward Earth. It had little impact on most people's lives, but it gave scientists a celestial thrill. Dick Wilson reports.
The sun is a stormy sphere that constantly flares with magnetic clouds of solar energy. Monday, the sun produced a spectacular solar storm. It created a giant tidal wave of electrified gases called a coronal mass ejection.
You see a flare going off, you see a shock wave leaving it. Basically, it's a tsunami going across the surface of the whole sun.
The cloud of magnetic energy headed towards Earth measured 30 million miles across, according to scientists. In the past, events such as this have caused problems on Earth.
We have had situations where these things have interfered with spacecraft, interfered with communications, interfered with power grids.
Satellites in the highest orbits above the Earth are most vulnerable, but there's no threat to life on Earth. The solar magnetic waves don't penetrate the Earth's magnetic field. Scientists say we're in a new 11-year cycle of solar activity, which is expected to increase and peak in the next 4 to 5 years. And we should expect many more powerful solar storms. Dick Wilson, CNN, Atlanta.
The Space Shuttle Columbia and crew are back on Earth after their mission was cut short by an equipment problem. Columbia landed at the Kennedy Space Center on Tuesday, just 4 days after it took off on what was supposed to be a 16-day mission. NASA brought the shuttle home because an electric generator had to be shut down to keep it from overheating or possibly exploding. The Columbia crew will get another chance in July to complete their science mission. And equipment problems on the Russian space station Mir seem to be under control since the arrival of a supply ship full of repair gear. The cargo includes fire extinguishers, oxygen generators, and canisters to remove carbon dioxide from the air. Before the supplies arrived on Tuesday, the crew had only an 8 to 9 day supply of canisters left.
Scientists have always thought the Big Bang 10 to 15 billion years ago scattered debris and light evenly through space, and that it continues to move uniformly through space. That's an important part of Einstein's theory of relativity. But new research out of the University of Rochester and the University of Kansas may have turned that theory upside down. They say movement of matter and light through the universe isn't uniform, but rather has an up and down, a basic sense of direction.
Before, we'd think that the universe has no preferred directions, but the result that I and John Ralston found indicates that there may actually be a direction in space that is out of the ordinary compared to other directions.
Here's how scientists came to their conclusions. Galaxies throughout the universe emit radio waves that travel through space and can be monitored by radio telescopes here on Earth. Scientists have known for some time that as these radio waves move, they twist around on themselves like a corkscrew, a process known as polarization. Now 2 scientists have discovered radio waves rotate fastest around a line of sorts that runs between the constellations Aquila and Sextans. And radio waves moving in other directions spin slower. Scientists say this difference is baffling because till now they thought that within the universe, all radio waves, whatever direction, should behave exactly the same.
Researchers John Ralston and Borg Nodland say they have collected 20 years' worth of data from scientists all over the world and have analyzed that data for the last 4 years. They are confident their findings will hold up to the onslaught of scrutiny they're about to receive from the scientific community.
It's just something that is so contrary to our present knowledge of physics, our present understanding of the universe, the basis of gravity, how light waves work, that it's going to be a long time before it can be confirmed and where most of the scientists are going to agree on it.
Even skeptics say if it's true, it will significantly change the way we think of the universe. Ann Kellen, CNN, Atlanta.
The European Space Agency launched an Ariane rocket on Wednesday night. The rocket carried 2 communication satellites, one for a Thai company, the other for a Japanese consortium. It's the 95th Ariane mission since ESA began commercial launches 15 years ago.
Space is a place into which few people have traveled, but many dream to go. Two of those dreamers figured prominently in the U.S. pop culture of the 1960s. And as Al Goodman reports, they're finally about to make that journey into the heavens.
Here on the tarmac in Madrid is one of the most unusual cargoes ever bound for space. Packed into this rocket, which will be launched horizontally from midair, are some of the cremated remains of 24 people. They're each tucked into a vial the size of a lipstick holder. Some were quite famous. When he was alive, Timothy Leary knew all about taking strange trips with psychedelic drugs. For his part, the late Gene Roddenberry dreamed so much about space travel that he created Star Trek. Now, Leary and Roddenberry are really going to outer space with some help from their friends and relatives.
Timothy's always wanted to be a space pioneer. He has been one, and now he's actually going to be able to travel into space. This was his last wish, was for me to get him into space, and that's why I'm doing it.
Theirs will be the first ashes known to be left in space. An American company, Celestis, is charging $5,000 US per person for the ride. That will not cover the company's costs this time, but they're planning on a big future in this business.
No, I think it's actually a very appropriate memorial to someone that as humanity moves out into space, we take all of our rituals, all of our celebrations, and all of our activities, including honoring the recently passed into space.
Leary and company already have been on a long trip for this flight. It started months ago when the rocket was loaded under the belly of a cargo plane in California. Relatives and friends bid farewell. The plane flew to Spain so the rocket could pick up its main payload, Spain's first research satellite. In Spain, the ashes are not getting top billing.
Every culture has its own view of death. For some, this would be unthinkable. But for these unusual astronauts, the goal is to bring the ancient practice of cremation to a higher dimension. Al Goodman for CNN, Madrid.
The plane released the American-built Pegasus rocket. It dropped briefly in a free fall and then fired its first stage. At the front of the rocket was the historic cargo, some of the cremated remains of 24 people, including Timothy Leary of psychedelic drug fame and Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. Theirs would be the first ashes left in space, a kind of space funeral with no one to officiate. The rocket also carried Spain's first research satellite, Minisat-1. It hopes to compete with more costly, larger satellite programs in the future. The ashes are packed into 24 vials, each the size of a lipstick holder. These, in turn, are inside a canister attached to the last stage of the rocket. The ashes should orbit Earth for at least a year and probably longer. They will finally burn up when re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. An American company, Celestis, is charging $5,000 US per person for the ride. A second funeral trip is planned for later this year as scientific research and the human rituals of death open new frontiers to go where no man has gone before. Al Goodman for CNN, Madrid.
Erstmals sind die sterblichen Überreste von 24 Menschen im Weltraum bestattet worden. Die amerikanische Trägerrakete Pegasus startete von den Kanarischen Inseln aus mit den Mini-Urnen ins All. Unter anderem wurde die Asche des legendären Star Trek-Produzenten Gene Roddenberry und die des LSD-Gurus Timothy Leary auf den ewigen Sternentrip geschickt. Deutsche Bestattungsunternehmer beklagen jetzt die starren Vorschriften, die es hierzulande nicht erlauben, Verstorbene in den Himmel zu schicken.
Science and Technology Week, brought to you by IBM.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ann Kellen. What would it feel like to float in zero gravity? Astronauts and cosmonauts know, and now so do a handful of brave college students. They got a chance recently to do science experiments on board the NASA plane known as the Vomit Comet. Miles O'Brien was there to document their adventure.
We have a pilot briefing this morning, as usual.
If you want to fly on this plane, you better have the right stuff.
Water pill?
Stuff like industrial strength motion sickness pills.
You really need them.
And barf bags by the bundle.
I got 6 in there. Like, the backups.
I'm not going to ask who the first-time flyers are.
Because all of us are first-time flyers aboard NASA's Vomit Comet.
We're from Texas A&M University.
They are college undergrads, decked out in olive green, ready and willing to turn green for the weighty pursuit of scientific research and the not-so-weighty desire to get a taste of life without gravity. Given the gravity of the occasion, they invited me along for the ride. Got batteries, notepad, pens, more batteries. 6X, and then the pill. Should I do it? Take the pill. I'm ready. The plane is a KC-135, the military version of the Boeing 707. Based in Houston, NASA flies it over the Gulf of Mexico in a roller coaster pattern. For the mathematically challenged, it's a parabolic curve. But I bet your first parabola in high school geometry didn't thrill you like this.
Oh my God!
That's Texas A&M junior Delia Lockridge. So what is weightlessness or zero-G like?
It's indescribable, man. It's, oh, wow. Oh, I think we're going down now.
Whoa, man.
That was way cool. Oh, man. That was like nothing. It felt like my stomach was going to the top of my head, and finally my head caught up with it.
The fun starts when the plane noses over into a steep dive.
Weightlessness in this case is actually a free fall, but it's really no different in space. Astronauts who fly aboard the shuttle are actually free falling around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour.
As you can see, there is no such thing as a free lunch on the Vomit Comet. The price for 30 seconds of floating fun? Sudden equal doses of 2Gs, or double the pull of gravity, which is why so many people lose their lunch up here.
Oh my gosh, it's so neat. It's like, it's like we're in the shuttle.
Actually, it's tougher than riding on a space shuttle. Ask test director Bob Williams. After 65,000 parabolas, he should know.
You're going up there and you're having lots of hyper-Gs or more than 1G experiences, and then you swoop to 0G and you do this over and over and over again, and that's hard on you.
It was very hard on Delia Lockridge. She's one of about 100 students who won the chance to fly with a scientific experiment in 0G.
University of Maryland.
All told, there were teams from 24 colleges. They answered NASA's call for proposals, designing, funding, and building experiments which ran the scientific gamut. They studied the human circulatory system, tested an idea for a space station damage detector, and in Texas A&M's case, looked at how liquids and gases can be more easily separated in space.
Pressure's at 20 psi.
The team worked for 8 months, non-stop, through vacations, to get to this hangar.
It's just a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You can go to the beach any day.
Their experiments were carefully scrutinized, and so were they. Each participant had to pass a rigorous physical, spend some time in a chamber which creates conditions found at high altitude, and pass a written exam. The total cost to NASA, about $100,000. Well worth it, they say, if some of these bright minds are enticed to join the ranks.
Well, I did unfortunately hear one woman say that she's already had an offer from Frito-Lay. I mean, sure, they need that talent too, but we'd like to keep them in the space program.
NASA normally uses the Vomit Comet to train astronauts, test experiments and equipment, and on one occasion, film scenes from a movie, Apollo 13.
This is the crew of the Apollo 13, wishing everyone back on Earth a pleasant evening.
While the ride on this fabled plane might have been enough to sell these students on NASA careers, the space agency doesn't like to take chances. The students rubbed elbows with astronauts when the most recent shuttle crew came home, and at a barbecue in a restaurant outfitted like a shrine to the manned space program. Impressed then with the group?
Absolutely. I think you got a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy here. And I'd like to really bottle this energy. You could do a lot with it.
For some, the flight simply added to their energy and enthusiasm.
It's better than any roller coaster I've ever been on. Your stomach doesn't go up and down, your whole body does.
What about, does this make you want to be an astronaut more?
Even more. I want to have this last for a long time. 30 seconds isn't enough.
Texas A&M team leader Shannon Bragg wasn't bragging when she said she was among those having a ball. So was I. But alas, her partner, Delia Lockridge, was among the kills, as NASA lovingly calls them.
It was kind of like being on a roller coaster, going over the top when your stomach jumps to the top. And with a roller coaster, it falls back down immediately. But on the KC-135, it never fell down.
She was not alone. By the 40th and final parabola, the cushioned cabin looked like a battlefield littered with casualties.
Today, it's a record, all-time record, 12 out of 16 students were down. I'm laughing. My heart went out to them. But again, it shows their dedication because they want to come back, you know.
Well, maybe not anytime soon.
Well, it'll probably be a little while for me. I'll probably wait a little while.
Yeah, did you feel it? I did. I loaded, so that's the most fun I've ever had throwing up, ever. Most fun ever throwing up.
Oh my God!
A qualified endorsement, yes. But the way NASA sees it, another satisfied customer. Miles O'Brien, CNN, Houston.
In case you were wondering, Miles made it through the flight without getting sick. A rocket launch this week carried a payload unlike any other, the cremated remains of some famous space enthusiasts. The Pegasus rocket was dropped from an L-1011 over the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa on Monday. It put into orbit Spain's first scientific satellite, which will study gases between the stars, and a separate capsule carrying small portions of the ashes of 24 people, including LSD guru Timothy Leary and Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry. The capsule with the ashes in it is expected to stay in low Earth orbit for several years and then drop into the atmosphere and burn up. And NASA launched a new weather satellite early Friday morning, just in time for the Atlantic hurricane season. The satellite should reach its orbit 22,000 miles over the equator in mid-May.
The payload on STS-83 is the Microgravity Science Laboratory, a pressurized module in Columbia's payload bay. Space Shuttle Columbia on the pad was the first in the shuttle fleet. Arrived at KSC in March of 1979, and the first launch was from Pad A, same pad as we're using today, on April 12, 1981. It deployed the first satellite in the Space Shuttle program on STS-5 and then flew the first Spacelab mission on STS-9. Columbia is named after a small sailing vessel that was based in Boston Harbor in 1792. And another one of Columbia's claims is that it brought back the long-duration exposure facility from space after almost 6 years in space. We see our commander, Jim Halsell. And Jim Halsell was flown previously on STS-65 and STS-74. Here's our pilot, Susan Still, the second female pilot to fly the Space Shuttle. Graduate of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University locally in Daytona Beach. Janice Voss, our payload commander on this mission. She's logged more than 18 days in space. This is her third Space Shuttle flight. having flown on STS-57 and STS-83. And mission specialist number 3, or rather payload specialist number 1, I'm sorry, Roger Crouch, will be responsible for much of the science operations on board the microgravity Spacelab. This is his first space shuttle flight. Mike Gernhardt, mission specialist number 2, and also our flight engineer for STS-83. Here's Greg Lentiris. Payload specialist number 2, his first flight into space, also responsible for much of the science on board the Microgravity Science Laboratory. Here's Don Thomas, once again, mission specialist number 3. We're standing by now to come out of this 2-hour built-in hold in just a few moments. Coming out in 4, 3, 2, 1. We're now at T-minus 3 hours and counting. This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 2 hours, 58 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. And we see the STS-83 crew has just left the suit-up room, headed for the elevator. Be heading down to the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, board the astronaut van for the 20-minute ride out to pad 39A. Meanwhile, out at the launch pad, the final inspection team has just reported that their activities are complete and they're leaving the pad. And in just a moment, we should see the crew, many KSC employees and well-wishers waiting to greet them as they come out of the elevator. And here they come. Than usual contingent of employees wishing them well. This is shuttle launch control at T-minus 2 hours, 37 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. The astronauts have arrived at the 195-foot level of the fixed service structure where the orbiter access arm is located. And the commander and pilot will walk across the arm shortly to begin their boarding, while the other crew members await their turn, either out on the arm or on the fixed service structure. And as we've been able to tell, they're really enjoying the very nice day out at the pad to take advantage of looking at Space Shuttle Columbia being prepared in the last hours here for flight.
NTD, MS-1, com check. MS-1, NTD, loud and clear, Janice. Good morning, welcome aboard. Morning, John, loud and clear here.
All activities proceeding on schedule. We're not working any issues. Weather continues to be cooperative, at least at this point in time. At T-minus 59 minutes and counting, this is shuttle launch control.
Okay, and this is the entity conducting launch status check. All stations verify, ready to resume count, and go for launch. OTC. OTC is go. Copy. TVC. Start the boosters and go for launch. TTC. TTC is go. LPS. LPS is go. Houston flight.
Houston flight is go.
Copy. Myla. Myla go. STM. STM go. Safety console. Safety console go. STE.
STE is no go at this time.
Copy. CDR. Columbia is go. Copy. LRD. LRD is go. And SRL.
SRL is go. You have a range clear to launch.
Standing by to start the main engine helium purge sequence, preparing for main engine start activities.
CLS is go for purge sequence 4.
And now we'll be checking the flight controls on the orbiter, the Aero surface profile test. Vehicle will go to internal power in about 10 seconds.
CDR OTC to verify heater reconfiguration complete. Yes, sir, that is complete. Thank you.
Coming up on T-minus 3 minutes 23 seconds. We're now gimbaling the three main engines, checking their steering capability. Next activity will be to pressurize the liquid oxygen tank on the external tank at T-minus 2 minutes 55 seconds. And we'll start the retraction of the Gox beanie cap.
DLT OTC will go to clear caution warning memory and verify no unexpected errors.
Captain what?
Topping off for the fuel cells being terminated.
Caution and warning memory clear, non-expected errors.
I copy flight crew. You will go to close and lock your visors, initiate O2 flow, and enjoy your on-orbit spring break.
Roger that, sir. We'd like to say thanks to everybody who has got Columbia and us ready to fly.
CLS is go for ET, LH2 pressurization.
Pressurizing the hydrogen tank on the external tank now. Replenishing the liquid hydrogen tank has been terminated.
T-minus 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Standing by now to arm the sound suppression water system. T-minus 1 minute. Solid rocket booster joint heaters being turned off. Final check now of the booster commands. Locks and LH2 fill and drain valves are closed. Payload bay vent doors are positioned. Standing by to hand off to Columbia's computers.
CLS is go for auto sequence start.
And the handoff has occurred. Columbia's computers now controlling.
20.
Firing chain is armed. Sound suppression water system activated. Range safety systems armed.
10.
9, 8, 7. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with the Microgravity Science Laboratory, our research bridge to the space benefits of tomorrow.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
Houston's now controlling. Columbia is rolling on course toward a 160 nautical mile high orbit, inclined 28.5 degrees to Earth's equator. Columbia already traveling 300 miles per hour. Columbia's three main engines is now throttled back to 2/3 throttle to prepare the spacecraft to pass through the area of maximum air pressure and go supersonic. Altitude now 2.5 miles, 1.5 miles east of the launch pad. Columbia is traveling 650 miles per hour. One minute to 55 seconds since liftoff. Flight controller standing by in the next few seconds for burnout and jettison of the twin solid rockets. Booster officer confirms good separation of the solid rockets.
Columbia, performance is nominal.
Copy, performance nominal. That call indicating that Columbia's performance thus far is just as planned. Altitude now 34 miles. Columbia is traveling 3,000 miles per hour, 42 miles east of the Kennedy Space Center. 6.5 minutes since launch, 2 minutes to cut off of the main engines. Booster officer confirms cutoff of the main engines.
Columbia, we showed a nominal MECO. OMS 1 is not required. You have a go for the photo DTO.
Copy, go for the DTO.
Let's go for auto sequence start. 25 seconds. 20. 15. 10.
Copy, net.
Copy.
TLS is go for main engine start.
3 engines. 100.
102, 102, auto.
3 engines, 104.
Rolls commanded.
VLA.
Set. BFF visuals are good. Roll program, Houston.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
Guidance looks good.
Three engines, throttling, 67.
30 seconds.
Tape check at Mach 1.
Okay, coming up. Mach 1, mark.
Same.
Would be about max dynamic pressure.
Looking for 1.3.
30,000 feet, Mach 1.3.
3 engines, throttling, 104.
Great. Feet coming up on Mach 2.
Go with throttle up.
Copy, go with throttle up. Feet. 90 seconds. Happy, thank you, Mike. Sky is getting darker. SRBs, Mach 4. Less than 50?
It's pretty cool out.
Copy.
merged.
Okay, we're off the SRBs. Okay.
Aguaria. Set up.
Looks like pretty narrow, no?
Eco confirmed.
Eco confirmed, and we have 25, 824.
Look at the ice.
Yeah, copy. Standing by for my maneuver. Right. Copy, go for the GTO. 104 plus 2 seconds.
Okay, 87 is good.
And Columbia, Houston, yes, Susan, you have a go to press that, to push that circuit breaker in.
Copy.
Houston, Columbia for TIPS activation.
And good afternoon, Roger. Good to see you there.
Roger's not on com yet, but I'll relay.
And welcome to Spacelab, Janice.
It's great to be here, Mark. My, there's a lot of space back here.
This is Mission Control Houston. We continue to take live video through the high-pack television system of the middeck area of Columbia. In view, astronauts Don Thomas and Greg Lanteris, who are working some photo documentation activities with one of the protein crystal growth experiments. Columbia is currently approaching the west coast of South America.
Well, we are live with you on TVC number 1, and just wanted to ask you a question. We do see an image on the viewfinder above TVC number 2, which we thought was inoperational. Can you confirm that you are seeing an image, or if the quality of the image?
Yeah, you guys have good eyes to pick that up. We do have a good image up there, good quality image on TVC number 2. The monitor is there, and when I came back from lunch, you know, just an hour and a half ago, that image was not there, so somehow we got it. Hotel Spacelab for Express. Hey, Dorina, FO2, the checkout of experiment power is complete, and everything looks good on Express. As you know, this is one of our premier facilities that will be flying on Space Station shortly in a few years here, and we'll have up to 8 of these up on board at any given time, and this is the first checkout of them, and everything is looking great on it so far. We're really excited about flying actually pieces of the space station on our shuttle flight. Spacelab, step Bravo of FO4 is complete.
Okay, we copy that, Greg. And when you're ready, I'll tell you what you're going to be doing. Okay, the igniter is glowing.
I can see the soot bank. The igniter swung into position. The flame is there. We're way past the soot point. On 1, and 2, and 3. Okay, we're going down. Oh, it looks like we're finding a soot point. Oh no, we still can't find it. It's still sooting, and we're at the minimum flow rate. We almost made it. 1 or 2 more clicks and we would have been below the soot point. We have a blue region above the flame. The flame itself is glowing with a lot of soot, and there's a break through about 3/4 of the flame tip. It's very steady.
It's LF8SCB1.
Spacelab Huntsville for Greg. DCE is happy with the pressure. You can press.
Copy that. Throttle closing.
Good copy.
Well, hang on.
In Columbia, we're 2 minutes to the LOS. We'll be back with you at 21:54, and we'll be off the tail until about 22:08.
Huntsville Spacelab for DCE. Post-test doesn't want to close. The only option under the little cursor thing is move.
Okay, select sample, and that should do it. And then select yes.
Chance, look here and wave to me now. Okay. All right, here we go.
Spacelab Huntsville for Janice.
Go ahead for Janice.
Okay, Janice, to clear that message, put the cursor over the word please and press shift and the left mouse button. That will clear the message. And then we're working out a small procedure for you to do an off-nominal power down.
Okay, did clear the message, thanks, and I'll stand by. And just for your information, the configuration, you can see in the downlink, the igniters are out and the needles are at the dispense position, or the deploy position. And per step 2 of the power down, switch 2 and 1 are now off. So all the 3 circuit breakers are on the avionics package.
Top of your head says a camcorder.
Certainly. I want to narrow down the aperture.
That's better.
Right.
Can you see yourself?
I think I may turn that off. Oh, there we go. Oh, so before it's right here, you see?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just got it done, so your timing, did the 801 Pro, and I tried to keep 2 off. So I see us out of that, back to FCS checkout. Let's see, we're at about 8720.
Santa needs to buy a yellow book. Entry.
One thing you can see if you look out the right-hand side is how fast it appears we're going. So we're actually going faster now than we were in orbit, way lower. It's going to start appearing like we're screaming.
What's our altitude now?
The altitude now is right at 400,000 feet, 65 miles.
And we're doing 18,000 miles an hour?
Yeah, we're doing about 24.4 and a half or so. I bumped the stick. Still some puffs coming off the tail, not quite as big.
I thought I heard 27 on the pad.
I think that was for him.
Oh, okay. 15. Okay. Got my checklist right here. Smooth, Jim. Right on the money, buddy.
Thanks a lot. Trying the brakes here. Let's see if they grab. Just a little bit.
Okay, 70, braking 7.
Even if they go at 60.
Shoots jettison.
Wheel start, Houston.
Yeah, that was great.
Good job.
Columbia, Houston, energy, ground track, and nav, or go.
That call from Mission Control indicating that Columbia is right on course with its current speed and altitude and ground track all right on target for runway 33. This view from the Kennedy Space Center now showing Columbia as it approaches. Columbia's range to touchdown now 68 miles. Actually 38 miles. Speed 790 miles per hour. Altitude 56,000 feet.
The vehicle's been at about 1 G for the past minute or so as it flew basically a straight line to hack intercept. Now as it rolls onto the hack, the G level will increase a little bit. It'll be about 1.5 Gs.
Copy on at 180.
To the deconditioned bodies of the astronauts, that 1.5 Gs feels more like around 3 or 4 Gs had they been in condition.
Columbia is now performing a right overhead turn to align with the runway with 150 degrees left to go in that turn. Columbia's altitude 19,500 feet. Speed 425 miles per hour.
On at the 90.
Mechanics officer reports landing gears down and locked. Main gear touchdown. Drag chute deploy. Nose gear touchdown. Columbia, welcome home. Your landing and deorbit looked great. No post-landing deltas.
Copy that, thank you.
Convoy vehicles now moving in toward Columbia.
Columbia, Houston, we will be performing the hydraulic load test.